Hey everyone! I've talked about auto weaving before in a couple of videos, and in this one we'll look at how it can be used at max level to optimize DPS, or how to at least be partly a melee hunter, as I understand that is most hunters' dream. The gear shown here will be used throughout the testing. And this is the spec. No pets will be used in the testing. First off, if you aren't familiar with what auto weaving is, I'll show it here. Your auto shoot and auto attack don't share cooldowns. This means that while your auto shoot cooldown is cooling down, you can use your auto attack and then go back and forth. This allows the hunter to use both melee and ranged auto DPS instead of just having to use the melee weapon as a stat stick. Auto attack does a lot of damage in vanilla, so being able to use both is a pretty big DPS increase. I'll start off by saying that this is very useful while leveling. The biggest issue with this gameplay is having both a mob in melee range and one in auto shoot range. Your pet will help you with that. If you want to know more on how to use auto weaving while leveling a hunter, I'll have a link to my hunter leveling video in the description. Anyways, let's go back to the actual testing. I've been shown how much DPS auto shoot does. At first it's around 220 and then it slowly dips down to 190 towards the end of that clip. And so let's compare that to the melee DPS. I'm using the Hunter DPS weapon, a sword, which is pretty easy to acquire and actually works pretty fine for this play. As you can see, auto attack initially does about 120 DPS and dipping down towards 110 in the end. If you can't do both, then of course you do auto shoots. However, if you could do both and execute it perfectly, then you should be able to have about 330 DPS with nothing but wide attacks. This in turn means that you can do 330 DPS while completely And let's say you had a pet out and the pet does maybe 80 DPS. That makes it 400 plus DPS with nothing but wide hits in almost previous gear, without any consumables and no buffs besides self buffs. That is pretty good. Sometimes you will have to either do auto shoot or do auto attack, as they come off cooldown at the same time. That means you can't get full melee DPS plus full auto DPS all the time. The key is to have the ranged weapon speed and melee weapon speed to line up perfectly. This is however a bit tricky and I don't think I understand it fully. So far I've shown weaving on two targets, one melee and one ranged. What if we were to try and weave on one target? If doing so, you should use Aspect of the Shida. In my testing, it's still an increase compared to just doing melee or just doing ranged, but you will have to work for it and it's not really as good as having two targets to weave on. Either way, so far we've only been looking at wide hits, so let's add some abilities. You're essentially trying to combine melee and ranged rotations without having the one interrupt the other. For melee, you can use Raptor Strike and Immolation Trap. Raptor Strike increases the damage of your next melee attack by 160 at max level. With talents, you can get a plus 20% crit chance on it. As the cooldown of Raptor Strike is 6 seconds and the auto attack cooldown of the weapon I'm using is 3.2, this means that every other melee attack will be about 30% crit chance and it will be a yellow hit, which means less chance to not hit or having a glancing blow. Immolation Trap is a 15 seconds long dot, which is pretty good damage and good damage to mana ratio as well. You can get a talent to increase damage of it by 30%. Meanwhile, the trap has a 15 seconds cooldown. You will need to be out of combat to use it, meaning you'll have to use Feign Death, and Feign Death has a 30 seconds cooldown unfortunately. Looking at the normal ranged rotation, it consists of weaving auto shoot with aimed shot and using multi-shot off the cooldown. Do note that the DPS seen here is not quite correct, as multi-shot hits 3 targets, Hence, I'll divide the multi-shot DPS by 3 and keep the other damage as it is. I tested out several different rotations, such as full ranged and sneaking in raptor strikes whenever multi-shot, aimed shot and auto shoot were on cooldown. This was of course a bit tricky to manage. I eventually found that using raptor strike together with multi-shot on top of weaving worked the best. It did a bit more DPS than the normal ranged, and I could do it for at least twice as long. I now added 5 points to improved aspect of the hawk and did some more testing. I also tried using a slower weapon, namely a 3.8 axe instead of a 3.2 sword. I did this as an attempt to try and reduce the time my auto attack was off cooldown but couldn't be used. Essentially, the weave build I prefer replaces aimed shot with raptor strike and auto attack, and you can also add in immolation track if you'd like to. The benefit of doing this is that partly you'll be doing some more DPS, but more importantly, you'll save a lot of mana. As you could see, by using this weave build, I could sustain slightly higher DPS for about twice as long, compared to just using the normal ranged rotation. This weave build does however require there to be 2 targets, one in melee range and one in auto range, which won't always be the case. But perhaps in a dungeon or so, there could be a caster mob and a melee mob tanked by the tank. I can also think of at least 3 boss fights in Molten Core where this could be useful. I'd like to end by saying that it won't always be better to use this weave rotation, however, sometimes it will be a DPS increase. It should be another tool you have in your shed, ready to use whenever the situation favors it. The testing I've done shows that it's a small DPS increase, but more importantly, you don't spend nearly as much mana. But like I said before, it's also a more active playstyle. You could however make add-ons to help with the switching targets. And as I mentioned before, this is a lot better while leveling, as you can easily make sure that you have one melee target and one ranged target using your pet. I hope that I could teach you something by making this video and perhaps open your eyes a bit more to the potential of auto weaving. Thanks for watching.